Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something, well, pretty fundamental. The nature of reality, consciousness. Big questions.
Huge questions. And specifically, we're looking at this idea of materialism, that physical stuff is all there is, basically.
Right, but what happens when the evidence starts to, push back against that, when things don't quite fit?
Exactly. And that's where our source material comes in today. It's excerpts from a text called The Emergence of Postmaterialist Science.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack the arguments, the evidence presented in this text. Evidence that, well, challenges that conventional materialist view.
And suggests we might need a broader scientific model, something more expansive.
It really drills down into that core question. Are we just incredibly complex biological machines? Sort of sophisticated meat puppets?
Or is consciousness something more? Something fundamental in its own right, maybe not entirely dependent on the brain.
And the research areas this text covers are, frankly, pretty mind-bending. We're talking about intention influencing the physical world.
Perception beyond the usual senses.
And even evidence that the authors argue points towards consciousness surviving after physical death.
It's definitely going to be a fascinating exploration. So where do we start?
Let's dive right into the core claims. The text basically says, look, the materialist paradigm, it's just too restrictive based on the empirical evidence we're seeing now.
Right. It argues pretty strongly that the data itself demands an expanded model. It's not just a philosophical preference.
And it grounds this in specific research. First off, there's the mind's influence on our own bodies.
Yeah, this is really interesting. The text points out how things like our intentions, our beliefs, even our emotions, they don't just sit there passively.
They actually do things.
Exactly. They influence brain activity, obviously, but also things like gene expression, even our immune systems, cardiovascular systems.
Which is significant, right? Because if our minds can influence our biology down to that level,
It makes it harder to argue we're just biology, just genes and environment reacting. That whole meat puppet idea starts to look a bit shaky.
it suggests a kind of top-down influence.
And it doesn't stop there. The authors argue this influence isn't necessarily confined within our bodies.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, they cite studies looking at mental abilities, perceptions, that seem to capture information beyond the normal limits of space and time.
Without using the ordinary senses.
Apparently so. Suggesting perception might not just be something happening locally inside your head.
Okay, that's already pushing boundaries. But it gets even stranger, doesn't it? The influence on the external physical world.
Right. This is where it really challenges classical physics. The text talks about studies where focused human intention, just thought, essentially,
Yeah.
appears to influence things like the wave function in quantum mechanics. You know, how particles behave at that fundamental level.
Seriously, influencing quantum events.
That's what the studies suggest, according to this text. And also affecting things like random number generators.
Like electronic devices.
Yes. And even the way water molecules form crystals, just through intention.
Wow. Okay, so the mind isn't just passively observing, it might be an active force.
That's definitely an implication the text explores. And it extends to influencing other biological systems too, remotely.
Remotely.
Like studies where someone focuses their intention on, say, plants or enzymes in a lab, or even the physiological state of another person who's physically distant, and seeing measurable effects.
That's quite a claim. And then there's the most controversial area, perhaps, consciousness after death.
Yes, this is probably the biggest challenge to materialism. The text presents evidence related to clinical death, specifically cardiac arrest.
So when the heart stops, brain activity ceases.
Right. And yet some people report having perceptions during this time, seeing or hearing things in the room, or even far away.
And these perceptions can be checked, verified later.
Exactly. Corroborated by independent witnesses. Veridical perceptions, they're called. And alongside these, often very deep, transcendent experiences.
So the argument in the text is, if the brain isn't functioning, but consciousness is still having verifiable perceptions and profound experiences,
then it strongly suggests consciousness might not require a functioning brain to exist, that it could continue, along with personality, after death.
and maybe points to, well, non-physical realities.
That's the implication the authors draw. And they bolster this with references to other lines of research, too.
Like what?
Things like investigations into communication with the deceased, scientific studies involving mediums, something called instrumental transcommunication.
Using technology for that.
Yeah, attempting communication via electronic devices. Also research on reincarnation and the work of Michael Newton mapping experiences between lives.
So it's presented as a cumulative case, lots of different threads pointing in a similar direction that materialism struggles with.
Pretty much. And finally, related to all this, the text looks at expanded states of consciousness.
Those transcendent experiences you mentioned.
Yes, whether they happen spontaneously or through practices like Kundalini or in shamanic contexts, or maybe using certain substances, entheogens.
The idea is that these experiences where people feel a vastly expanded sense of self and connection.
They also support the notion that we're fundamentally more than just our physical bodies, that our consciousness has a much wider scope.
Okay, so that's a lot of challenging evidence presented. Now, how does the scientific community react? The text addresses the debate, right?
It does. And it makes a very sharp distinction, actually, between what it calls genuine skeptics and, well, pseudo-skeptics.
Pseudo-skeptics, that sounds pointed.
It is. The text describes genuine skeptics in quite positive terms: unbiased, open-minded, motivated by truth, looking at all the evidence, using critical thinking.
Kind of the ideal scientist we picture, willing to question even their own belief.
Exactly. Cognitively supple is the phrase used, ready to adapt based on new data, even if it's uncomfortable.
So what about the pseudo-skeptics? What does the text say about them?
Well, it labels them fundamaterialists. Essentially, fundamentalists defending the materialist view at all costs.
How so? What do they allegedly do?
The text claims they engage in things like coordinated efforts to label this kind of research as pseudoscience, particularly online, say on Wikipedia, using pseudonyms.
And manipulating pages about researchers in the field.
That's the accusation made in the text, yes. That while they present themselves as defenders of reason and logic,
their actual approach, according to this source, is different.
Very different. The text describes them as closed-minded, not really interested in the facts if they contradict materialism, refusing to examine the evidence or conduct experiments themselves.
So if evidence comes up that doesn't fit,
they either deny it exists or just insist that, future discoveries in conventional physics or biology will eventually explain it, no matter what the current data says.
The text accuses them of intellectual dishonesty, even disinformation.
It does. And attacks on scientists doing the challenging work. The most extreme claim in the text is that they act as if they know what's absolutely possible or impossible, and that the ultimate goal is a kind of mental control of the population.
Wow. Okay, that's a really strong critique presented in the source material. A stark picture of the debate.
It definitely portrays it as more than just a scientific disagreement, more like a clash of fundamental worldviews and approaches.
So how does the scientific field even get to a point like this? The text brings in Thomas Kuhn, right? The idea of paradigm shifts.
Exactly. Kuhn's work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, is crucial here. His idea is that science operates within these frameworks, these paradigms.
The basic assumptions and theories everyone agrees on for a while.
Right. They guide research, what Kuhn called normal science. But, and this is key, paradigms have limits. They eventually encounter things they can't explain. Anomalies.
And Kuhn argued that sometimes scientists working inside a paradigm can be sort of blind to things that don't fit.
Precisely. The text uses that great example of astronomers. Western astronomers, assuming the heavens were fixed and perfect, just didn't really see or record things like new stars or comets for ages.
But Chinese astronomers with a different worldview
Had been noting them down for centuries. The paradigm literally affected what they perceived as relevant data.
So what happens when these anomalies pile up, according to Kuhn?
Well, if scientists keep trying and failing to explain them using the old rules, confidence in the old paradigm starts to wobble. You enter a period of crisis.
And that's when new ideas can emerge.
Yes, a competing paradigm might be proposed, often something radically different, not just a tweak.
And then you get a debate. Some championing the new, others defending the old.
You got it. The daring scientists, maybe younger ones, push the new view, saying it solves the puzzles. The establishment often resists.
Until eventually, if the new paradigm proves more useful, explains things better.
The balance tips. Scientists shift allegiance, the revolution happens, and you get a new period of normal science under the new set of rules.
The text gives examples, right? Flat Earth to spherical Earth.
Or the huge one, geocentrism, Earth at the center.
Ptolemy.
Right, to heliocentrism, the sun at the center. Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, that whole revolution. Even though, interestingly, the text notes someone proposed heliocentrism way, way earlier, but it was ignored.
Because the old paradigm wasn't ready for it.
Exactly. And the other big example is quantum mechanics emerging in the early 20th century.
Because classical physics just couldn't explain weird stuff happening at the atomic level.
Right. Things like particles being waves, superposition, entanglement, fundamental anomalies that forced a whole new paradigm.
And the connection the authors make is that scientists looking at consciousness and these mind-matter interactions today are in a similar spot.
That's the argument. Facing anomalies like the remote viewing, intention effects, near-death experiences we talked about that just don't compute within standard materialism.
Like the physicists facing quantum weirdness a century ago.
Exactly, which leads the text to lay out the key elements of this emerging post-materialist paradigm.
Okay, let's get into that. What are the core ideas here?
Well, the absolute foundation is that mind is irreducible and fundamental. Meaning it's not just something the brain produces, like digestion producing bile. Mind is seen as having its own fundamental existence, its own ontological status.
As fundamental as, say, matter or energy or space-time.
That's the idea. The text is clear. Mind doesn't arise from matter. It can't be reduced down to just physical bits. They mention philosophers like Chalmers and physicists like Lin who've suggested consciousness might be a basic building block of reality.
How do they support that?
Partly by pointing to subjective experience itself. Consciousness is how we experience anything. Music, taste, our own identity, the world. Without it, reality as we know it disappears.
It's the stage, basically.
Right. And I also argue that science itself is finding it needs the concept of mind more and more to understand the universe. Not just subjectively, but objectively.
Like the observer effect in quantum mechanics you mentioned.
Exactly. At the micro level. And at the macro level, the mind's demonstrable effects on the brain and body we discussed earlier. Mind seems to be playing an active role.
Which leads to a really wild idea in the text. If mind is fundamental, maybe it doesn't always need a complex brain.
Yeah, that's a fascinating extension. Could mental processes, some form of subjective awareness, exist at simpler levels of organization?
What kind of levels?
The text gives examples like Freeman Dyson's thought experiment about atoms maybe making choices, or evidence suggesting even simple protein molecules behave in complex ways, as if they had a mind, the authors put it.
And the amoeba example.
Right. The single-celled organism that, under stress, signals others. They clump together, form a multicellular slug that moves purposefully, finds food, then differentiates again. It looks like awareness and intention, even there.
So maybe consciousness is a spectrum, from atoms up to humans.
That's the kind of idea referenced, yeah. People like Dwayne Elgin, suggesting degrees of awareness and intentionality all the way up and down the scale of complexity. More complex system, more refined experience, maybe.
Okay. What's another key element of this post-materialist view?
The deep interconnection between mind, psyche, and matter, physis.
We tend to think of them as totally separate.
Right, that's our everyday experience. But the text argues that the evidence, especially from psi phenomena, shows they are intimately linked at a fundamental level.
And they connect this to Jung and Pauli.
Yes, their concept of the unus mundus, the one world. The idea that psyche and physis aren't ultimately separate but emerge from a single, deeper, common source or principle.
And this source is consciousness itself.
That's how the text interprets it. A kind of transcendental yet also immanent, everywhere present. Consciousness that underlies everything, physical and non-physical. And that underlying unity is what allows mind to influence matter.
But they make a point about quantum entanglement, right? That this connection isn't just entanglement.
That's an important clarification they make. Standard entanglement shows correlation at a distance, but it doesn't seem to allow for sending complex information like you might imagine in telepathy or intentional influence.
So whatever the psyche-physis link is, it might involve something more or different than just standard quantum mechanics.
That seems to be the suggestion, yes. It points towards mechanisms we don't fully understand yet.
Okay. And another point was about the mind acting as a force.
Yes, having a real capacity to influence the physical world. We talked about the psychosomatic effects, mind influencing our own body.
Right, the mentalese to neuronese translation, like thoughts affecting stress hormones or endorphins.
Exactly, that psychoneural transduction. But crucially, also the non-local exosomatic effects, mind influencing things outside the body.
And in both cases, information is key.
Absolutely central. Information that seems to operate beyond normal space and time constraints. And this process of information transduction, converting it between mental and physical forms. They mention physicists like David Bohm and his idea of active information bridging worlds.
And John Wheeler's idea that the universe is information, essentially.
Right. Information becomes incredibly fundamental in this view.
And this mental force, is it the same for everyone? The text mentioned a theory.
Ah, yes, the theory of cyclementarity.
Hmm.
This theory, proposed by the authors apparently, suggests that this ability of the mind to act as a force varies between people.
Okay.
And critically, it argues that a focused, coherent mind exerts more force like a laser compared to a light bulb.
And you can train this.
That's the claim. Rigorous mental training, like meditation practices aimed at sustained concentration, can actually strengthen this capacity, increase the mind's ability to influence reality.
So if the mind is fundamental, a force, interconnected,
Well, what about the
brain? We keep coming back to it if it's not producing the mind.
Then what is it doing? And the postmaterialist answer presented here is that the brain acts primarily as a filter or an interface.
A filter.
Yeah, or a reduction valve, sometimes called. The idea isn't new. The text notes, Berkson, William James Huxley all talked about it. The brain might normally limit our access to the full spectrum of consciousness.
Why would it do that?
Evolutionarily, maybe, to keep us focused on physical survival. Filter out the overwhelming bigger picture to help us deal with the immediate environment.
But sometimes that filter gets bypassed in those transcendent states.
That's the hypothesis.
Yeah.
The filter function gets temporarily disabled, allowing subjective access to those normally hidden non-physical aspects of reality.
But what about brain damage? Materialists always point to that. Damage the brain, you damage the mind. Doesn't that prove the brain creates it?
That's the standard argument, yes. But the text brings back William James's counter. That observation is also perfectly consistent with the brain being a transmitter of mind.
The radio analogy you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. If the radio receiver breaks, the music gets distorted or stops. But the radio didn't create the music signal. The signal came from elsewhere.
So brain damage affecting mental function doesn't necessarily mean the brain is the source of the function.
Correct. And the text argues that those near-death experiences, with verified perceptions when the brain is offline, strongly support this transmitter or filter model over the production model.
They use the television analogy too, right?
Yes, it's quite helpful. A TV set receives an electromagnetic signal, the program, from a broadcast station.
Okay.
It then decodes that signal into pictures and sound on the screen.
Right.
Now, if a wire comes loose or a component burns out inside a TV...
You get static or no picture or weird color.
Exactly. The output is messed up. But does that mean the TV invented the show?
No, of course not. The show exists independently, broadcast from the station.
Precisely. So the analogy suggests mental functions aren't created by or reduced to brain activity. The brain is the receiver, the interface.
And those expanded states are like the TV tuning into different channels or higher frequencies.
That's the extension of the analogy, yes. Temporarily widening its reception capacity, revealing aspects of reality that are always there but usually filtered out, making the invisible visible.
Okay, that clarifies the brain's role in this view. So wrapping up, what are the big implications if this post-materialist paradigm gains traction?
Well, the text calls them numerous and crucial. Fundamentally, it changes how we see ourselves.
Away from biological machines.
Towards something much more profound with inherent dignity and power. It invites us to explore our potential in ways materialism doesn't really allow for.
And it might foster different values?
The authors argue yes, encouraging respect, compassion, cooperation, peace, because it emphasizes our deep interconnection.
Including connection to nature.
Definitely. That psyche-physis link extends to the whole biosphere, fostering environmental awareness, a sense of responsibility for the planet, for Gaia.
And the text circles back to those big scientific revolutions again.
Yes, reminding us of the shift from flat Earth, from geocentrism.
To make the point that another one is coming.
That's the strong assertion, that we're approaching, or maybe in, the shift from materialist science to post-materialist science.
And the authors seem to feel this one is particularly important.
Deeply important. They state, while acknowledging they aren't prophets, their conviction that this will be the next great scientific revolution, potentially even more vital for human evolution than the Copernican one was.
Because it changes our understanding of ourselves, our minds, our capabilities.
Exactly. Leading, they believe, to a profound transformation of basically all aspects of life on Earth.
So quite a journey we've taken through this source material. We looked at the evidence challenging materialism.
from mind-body effects to psi phenomena, near-death experiences.
Explored the text's view on the scientific debate, the skeptic versus fundamentalist dynamic.
Put it in the context of Kuhn's paradigm shifts, seeing how science evolves through revolution.
And then unpacked the core ideas of the proposed post-materialist view itself, mind as fundamental, the deep interconnection, mind as a force, the brain as a filter.
Right, using that television analogy to understand the mind-brain relationship.
It really does represent a potentially massive shift in perspective, not just for scientists, but for, well, for everyone, how we understand who we are and what our place is.
So the question lingers, doesn't it? If the mind truly is fundamental, irreducible, and non-local force, with the brain just an interface, what does that really imply about our potential, about our connection to the very fabric of reality? What new questions does exploring this post-materialist perspective open up for you?